What happens to the child who was never chosen and never asked why? Not the golden child, not the black sheep, just the one who quietly disappeared between them. You were never the loudest, never the favorite, never the one who broke the rules or made them. You were the one who adapted, the one who adjusted, the one who stayed out of the way. And slowly you became a ghost in your own life. There's a child sitting at the dinner table, not crying, not laughing, just present. The oldest is cracking jokes. The youngest is spilling juice and stealing the spotlight. But the one in the middle? They're passing the salt unnoticed. No tantrums, no praise, no punishment. They've mastered the art of being neutral. So neutral, they vanish in plain sight. That's how it begins. Not with trauma, not with chaos, with silence. With the quiet belief that if you're not a problem, you don't deserve attention. A belief that forms early, then buries itself deep. If I don't scream, I don't exist. You don't have to be a middle child to carry that belief. Maybe you were the second best, the backup plan, the peacekeeper in a home at war. Maybe you learned to read the room before you could spell your own name. Always between extremes, always expected to make it easier for others. And no one ever asked what it cost you. Psychologists call it middle child syndrome. This isn't a joke, and it isn't something you grow out of, because invisibility isn't a phase. It's a role you get cast in by your family, your school, your society, and when you play it long enough, you forget it was ever a role to begin with. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like the filler in someone else's story? Like your needs were negotiable, your voice optional, your presence forgettable? Maybe you weren't the loudest. Maybe you weren't the favorite. But deep down, you knew you saw more than anyone else. If any part of this feels like you, don't look away, because what we're about to uncover next isn't just about middle children. It's about how entire systems teach people to shrink, to disappear, to serve without being seen. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that happened and how to take your voice back without becoming someone you're not. Stay with me. You've been quiet long enough. You build a life around not taking up space. You stop asking for things. You learn to keep the peace while someone else holds the mic. You become the glue, but never the masterpiece. This isn't just about sibling order. This is about who the world allowed you to become. The ones who balance, the ones who hold the center, we forget them. Not out of cruelty, out of design. This is the story of those who were never taught to be seen. The story of those who learned to stay small. And what happens when they realize they never had to. So now the question isn't, why were you ignored? Alfred Adler was one of the first to ask a question that most people never thought to ask. What if who we become has less to do with what we want and more to do with the role we were forced to play? He didn't believe personality was something fixed or inborn. He believed it was formed like clay, shaped by the dynamics of our earliest environment, the family. And within that environment, there was a pattern he couldn't ignore: birth order. The firstborn enters a world where they are the sole focus. They are praised for being responsible, scolded for slipping, and raised to lead. They carry the weight of expectation, sometimes to the point of perfectionism. The youngest, they're the baby. The last, often coddled, often adored, sometimes underestimated, sometimes spoiled, but rarely forgotten. They learn early that attention comes not from control, but charm. Not from leading, but from being loved. And in the middle, there's no title, no spotlight, no crown, no throne. Not the experiment, not the finale, just the space between. The middle child becomes whatever the family needs to keep balance. If the oldest is loud, they become quiet. If the youngest is fragile, they become strong. They adapt because no one else is going to adapt for them. They are not defined by who they are, but by who they are not the smartest, not the cutest, not the one with the plan, nor the one with the problem. Just there. It starts subtly. A birthday skipped, a soccer match missed, a drawing admired, but not hung on the fridge. They begin to internalize a message that was never spoken aloud. You're not the priority, not because the parents are cruel, but because the system has already allocated its energy. So the middle child compensates. They learn to observe rather than act, to mediate rather than dominate, to be flexible, likable, and low maintenance. In Adler's words, this is the hidden competition of siblings, not a fight for love, but for significance. And the middle child plays a quiet game. They compete by not competing, by withdrawing, by becoming the air around others. Essential but unseen. And here's where it turns from personal to existential. Because once this blueprint is set, once your sense of self is defined by absence, it doesn't stay in childhood. It grows with you. You become the person who lets others speak first, who apologizes for existing, who learns to read the room before entering it, who becomes whatever is needed just to stay needed. You become someone who survives by erasing your edges. All because, once upon a time, you weren't the first or the last, just forgotten. And over time, invisibility becomes familiar, comfortable even. But comfort doesn't mean fulfillment, and silence doesn't mean peace. It just means you've learned to live without being seen. Until one day you ask yourself the question Adler never stopped asking: what part of you is real, and what part is just a role you were assigned to play? You became the one everyone could count on, not because they asked you to be, but because no one else was. You learned early how to keep the peace, how to smooth over conflict, how to shrink yourself just enough to make space for everyone else's emotions. You weren't the loudest in the room. You were the one who noticed who was. You didn't demand to be heard. You waited to be asked. That day never came, so you kept waiting. You developed radar, an emotional scanner that detects tension before it erupts. You diffuse situations before they escalate. You laugh when you're uncomfortable. You compliment others when you're aching to be noticed. You work twice as hard just to be called dependable. And when someone asks you if you're okay, you say, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because you're supposed to be. The middle child role doesn't disappear when you leave home. It mutates. It follows you into the office, into your relationships, into friend groups. Suddenly, you're the one everyone turns to when things fall apart. You become the unofficial therapist, the fixer, the stabilizer. But who stabilizes you? Invisibility isn't always neglect. Sometimes it's overfunctioning. You're so good at holding it together that no one sees when you're falling apart. And when you do speak up, when you finally say, "I need help," the world pauses, stunned, because they never expected the silent one to make a sound. You might not be a middle child by birth, but you may have been cast into that role by life. Maybe you were the only one who kept your parents from fighting. Maybe you were the second choice, the backup plan, the one who had to adapt quickly without complaint. And in this world, those traits, flexibility, emotional intelligence, humility, are rarely rewarded. This society doesn't notice balance. It celebrates the extremes. The loudest voice wins the room. The flashiest persona dominates the feed. The most dramatic story gets the spotlight. So you shrink, not because you want to, but because the world doesn't know how to hold subtlety. It praises disruption, not diplomacy. Provocation, not presence. Visibility, not value. You might scroll through social media and wonder if you're invisible, not because you're unworthy, but because you refuse to turn yourself into a spectacle. And maybe you've started asking deeper questions. What does it cost to always be the one who understands? You never needed the center of the stage. You just wanted someone to notice you standing at the edge. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real power begins to grow. In the shadows, in the silence, in the souls who've watched long enough to finally see through it all. What kind of world rewards noise and punishes grace? What happens to the ones who whisper in a world addicted to screaming? We live in a world obsessed with the edges, the overachiever, the prodigy, the disruptor, the rebel, the one who broke the rules and won anyway, or the one who suffered so deeply that their story demands sympathy. We love the rise, we crave the fall. What we ignore almost religiously is the middle. The calm, the steady, the rational, the one who doesn't scream, the one who listens, the one who questions both sides and dares to say, maybe the truth lives somewhere in between. But in a world that rewards outrage, moderation is punished. And so the middle child, not just in families but in society, adapts. They stop asking to be heard. They fine-tune themselves to fit the background. They take pride in not needing too much. They label their self-restraint as maturity, their silence as strength, their adaptability as growth. But is it, or is it just survival? Modern systems are built on polarization. Media doesn't sell calm, it sells chaos. A viral tweet isn't measured by insight, it's measured by impact. Headlines aren't written to inform, they're engineered to provoke. And somewhere between the screamers and the victims, the moderate voices are drowned out. We call it balance. Society calls it boring. Capitalism operates the same way. The extremes rise. Billionaires and those barely surviving. Brands either scream luxury or scream relatability. You either hustle like your life depends on it or embrace the collapse. There's no middle path, no space for stillness. Social media codifies it. The algorithm rewards spectacle. You gain traction not by being thoughtful, but by being extreme. Outrage is currency. Victimhood is a brand. And nuance? Nuance is ignored. So where does that leave someone who's moderate, adaptable, quiet? It leaves them invisible. Not by accident, by design. Because when you can't be monetized, when your emotions don't spike graphs, when your presence doesn't divide people neatly into tribes, the system has no use for you. And so it teaches you how to erase yourself, how to smile more, how to need less, how to apologize before you even speak. Invisibility isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. And the middle child, the literal one, the metaphorical one, is the perfect subject, trained from birth to balance extremes, to compromise, to hold everything together while standing in the background. It's not that the world deletes you, it convinces you to delete yourself, and then thanks you for your service. So if you've ever felt like you're too thoughtful to be loud to be ignored, too nuanced to be liked, you're not broken. You're just living in a world that doesn't know how to reward balance, a world that forgets the value of those who hold the center, until that center disappears and everything collapses. You were the one who held the line, not because you were told to, but because no one else would. When the house was tense, you became the laughter. When things got loud, you stayed quiet. When people fought, you translated. You softened edges, filled in gaps, made everyone feel okay, even when you weren't. You became the bridge between anger and forgiveness, between chaos and calm, between people who wouldn't speak unless you stood between them. They called you strong. They didn't see the cracks forming beneath their feet. You learned to read emotions like a second language. You became fluent in the moods of others, memorized their triggers, built invisible walls around their needs, and every time something broke, you fixed it, silently, quickly, without asking for help, because that's what bridges do. They carry the weight. You learned to smile through the ache, to laugh when you wanted to cry, to comfort others while your own heart was unraveling. You became the safe space for everyone except yourself. And over time, the silence started to sound like truth, that your needs were too much, that your pain didn't matter, that you existed to serve, to stabilize, to smooth over every mess made by someone else's storm. You became the glue, the middle ground, the silence that holds others together. But silence has a cost. The cost is waking up one day and realizing you don't know who you are without other people's chaos, that your worth has become measured by how useful you are, that your identity is a patchwork of other people's expectations. It's the quiet resentment that builds when you're constantly there for others and no one shows up for you. It's the exhaustion that creeps in when you've become so good at being fine that no one thinks to ask if you're actually falling apart. It's the grief of looking in the mirror and realizing you've built your whole life around making sure others never break, while no one ever checked if you were breaking. You became the one everyone leaned on. And somewhere along the way, you forgot how to stand on your own. Who supports the supporter? Who holds the one who holds everyone else? When bridges collapse, people act surprised, as if they didn't see the weight building, as if the cracks weren't always there, as if strength was the same thing as invincibility. You were never weak for needing rest, or recognition, or help. You were just too used to being the one who never asked for it. Now the question isn't whether you'll keep holding everyone else up. The question is, when will someone finally hold you? Then there comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. A moment when the middle child, who has bent, softened, and adapted for everyone else, stops. They say no, not with anger, not with rebellion, just certainty. No, I won't fix this for you. No, I'm not available right now. No, I'm not okay. It's unsettling to others. The peacekeeper breaking character, the bridge refusing to carry weight, the glue letting things fall apart. But something inside has shifted. The realization hits like a quiet wave. It was never my job to hold everyone together. This is the psychological awakening, the turning point. The invisibility wasn't your fault. You weren't overlooked because you were unworthy. You were overlooked because you were too good at being low maintenance, too skilled at keeping the peace, too willing to disappear for others to shine. And now that skill becomes your weapon. Alfred Adler called it compensation, the human ability to turn a weakness into a strength. Middle children, conditioned to be unseen, begin to see everything. They become the observers, the analysts, the ones who read rooms with terrifying precision. They've lived in the shadows long enough to understand power without craving it. They've watched others burn from chasing attention. So when they step into leadership, it's not with noise, but with clarity. The quiet kid becomes the sharpest strategist. The dependable employee becomes the one who walks away to build something of their own. The one who always listened finally speaks. And when they do, the world listens differently, not because they demand it, but because their words carry weight. Born from years of silence, shaped by empathy, fueled by depth, they become the creators, the writers, the counselors, the architects of emotional space. Not interested in praise, only in truth. Not chasing applause, just purpose. The world doesn't expect it. The world doesn't see it coming because the world forgot they existed. And now, they don't need to be seen to move mountains. They don't need permission to take up space. They don't need validation to know their worth. They've earned a kind of quiet power, the kind that doesn't shake rooms but shapes them, the kind that doesn't shout but changes the frequency. This is what happens when the middle child fights back, not with fists, with presence. They said you were quiet. They said you were average, nice, stable, easy to be around. What they didn't say, what they never saw, was the depth beneath the calm. Because you weren't created to be invisible. You were conditioned to be. You weren't boring. You were busy observing. You weren't lost. You were watching everyone else fight for places you never wanted. You weren't silent. You were just waiting for someone to ask the right question. What happens to the one who was never seen? They learn to see what others can't. They see nuance in chaos. They see pain behind anger. They see patterns in noise. They carry truths that no one thought to look for. They become mirrors holding up reflections the world didn't know it needed. You were never meant to be the background. You were meant to understand what the spotlight hides. And now, you don't need the spotlight. You don't need louder words or bigger gestures. You don't need to beg for space. You don't need to prove anything. Your power is in your presence. Undeniable, quiet, whole. This isn't just for middle children. It's for anyone who's ever felt like the afterthought, the supporting role, the understudy in their own life. You are not a placeholder. You are not a role. You are a story the world didn't expect, and now it's time to be read. Not by shouting louder, by standing still and letting the silence speak for you. Because once the invisible become visible, the world doesn't go back to the way it was. It changes, and this time, it's your turn to be seen. If this spoke to something you've carried in silence, then it's time to stop carrying it alone. Let the world know you're done being invisible, not by shouting, but by choosing to be seen. If you felt understood, if even one line hit home, subscribe. Comment below with the role you were forced to play. Like this video so it reaches someone else who's been quiet for too long. Because the moment we speak, we stop disappearing. And the quiet ones, they're not done yet.